Welcome back, everybody. This is the video I wanted to make last Sunday. This is sort of the reprise of that. And today we're gonna make mead, and then we're gonna talk about pop culture and Vikings and shit. So let's start this. Cheers, or skål. All right. This will work in the following way. I'll try to explain how I'm making mead, and then we're gonna talk about other stuff while I'm doing it. So this is both a recipe for making mead, which I can't, actually tell you to do the way I do because it's not the safest way to do it, but that's part of what we're doing. All right, so let's start. We have here a barrel. It's a 30 liters barrel. I already put some water in because what we need is a lot of water. It's obviously not the only thing we need. The other thing we need is this honey. Lots of honey. 12 kilos of honey, actually, if you really want to know. And so yeah, to explain this, this is a 30-liter barrel. And I usually go with 1/3 honey and 2/3 of water and liquid. Other liquids, we're going to come into that in a second, because I've found that is a mix that works for me. You can add more honey, you can even use less honey if you feel like it, but 1/3 has worked for me so far. I've made mead before, like a decade ago, so this is sort of me retrying. All right, let's start this. I already filled water in there. It's warm water. It's not hot, but it's relatively warm. A lot of people will tell you if you do that, if you make mead, you have to actually use hot water to mix the honey with, or heat the honey up to kill some of the yeast that can be found in honey. I don't know if that's true or not. I think it's not necessary, but it can help. Also, I found that, like, if you have warm water, it mixes far better with the actual, the honey and water mix better. All right, so here we have a lot of honey. When I say a lot, I mean a lot. So I'm gonna ladle this in here, and then after a while, I'm gonna take a break of ladling stuff in there, and then I'm gonna, mix it up. So we'll see how that goes. It's also, it is a sticky thing to do, so that's why one of the reasons why I'm shirtless. All right, let's get started. Yeah, here we go. This is, as I said, a sticky thing. And a lot of fun. All right, so what else am I going to say today? I said I want to talk a bit about how we how Vikings and Norse mythology has been represented in pop culture, is used and abused in pop culture. I've recently, obviously, maybe I've recently read John Gwynn's The Shadow of the Gods, and then I read Röder Orm, or The Long Ships by Frans Bengtsson, and then I read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, retelling of Norse mythology, and I figured this is sort of a good end to do that, right? To talk about this as well. Because all of those are obviously pop culture representations of Norse culture, Norse mythology, and so forth. And it's something that I also encounter a lot in my other passion, so to speak, which is obviously heavy metals. Like, you have a lot of that in heavy metal as well. And my main issue, and this is sort of why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it here with the mead as well, is the idea, the illusion, and the lie, so to speak, of authenticity. One thing that you found a lot in John Gwynn's Shadow of the Gods is that he's taking a lot of care to describe minutely how Viking weapons look, how Viking dresses, like clothes look, and all that stuff. He's very good at that. And I'll give him that. It's extremely well done, according to what you might find these days when you do Viking reenactment, which obviously is a lot of time is obviously based on archaeological finds. That's sort of the whole idea. Is like you look what they think, you dig them up, and then you figure out how to make them yourself and how to play with, like, train with Viking weapons and figure out how Viking combat could have worked and all of that. That's cool. But, and this is the other bit there, is like, that doesn't mean that this gives you an accurate picture of how life in Viking times was. The other thing there is that our sources are obviously scarce when it comes to Vikings, right? We have like 2 Eddas and a bunch of runestones and a little bit more, but you know, it's not that much. And a lot of these texts are late sources. A lot of these, like the Eddas and stuff like that, they are written by people who are not, like, who are part of the culture, but already the Christianized culture. And a lot of what we're talking about here today will come down to paganism in a way, also neo-paganism, and how those things are used and abused. Once again, particularly when it comes to that weird mix of Norse culture, Northern culture, and heavy metal and fantasy books and stuff. Because when you look at it, like almost like every fantasy world, not every, but like most of the classic fantasy worlds have Vikings in it. And while they are usually wild-haired and whatnot, they're also always honorable and good fighters and all of that. They're very rarely are they described as just basically robbers and pirates, which is mostly what, when you actually look at it, the whole Viking thing is, right? You get in your ship, you travel to somewhere, you either conquer a city or you hold it hostage, you get all that money, you come home, you spend it on shit, and so forth. I mean, obviously there's travel and shit, a lot of that is in there, but the representation usually is more like they're the best fighters around, they're all like super good fighters and honorable, and we need them on our side to fight the evil. And whether that's like your, well, Tolkien at least put them on horseback, which is pretty cool. But still, you have that in there, and I personally think that is a problem, because what it does is it perpetuates some kind of myth of northern superiority in weapons. That idea of, like, you know, both like superiority in weapons, but also moral superiority. Those people are always like honorable, honest, and they're maybe a bit rough, but they're all honest and whatnot. No, they're not. Most of those people were humans, just like us. Were they honorable, honest, and whatnot, noble Vikings? Possibly. Were there lying, thieving, raping, whatever Vikings out there? Of course there were. Why wouldn't there? Like, seriously, the whole idea of this, like, the noble thing there is, as I said, like, highly problematic. It is exactly that kind of image that you then combine with, that was combined, or it has been carried over in part at least, from what fascism tried to do with Vikings when we were like in the 1930s. You have that deliberate idea of connecting German fascism, or like in general like Scandinavian fascism in a way. Like, not that like there's a lot of that. I mean, it was a general thing at the time, right? And you combine all of these things that you want your people, you construct that image of northern savagery and so forth. You combine all of that and paint it as the ideal picture of how to be, and then you use that to make people go and invade Poland, and that's and commit genocide. And that's sort of the problem that I see with a lot of this Viking representation nowadays, is we just took a lot of that over without, like, at least most people, we're going to come into the bad part of that, most people without being actual racists and fascists, but we took over the positive image that was created at that time. A lot of it was just taken over without any further like critical analysis or any critique of that. It's just like, yeah, we're not fascist, so we can totally be about like how Vikings are cool and how Vikings are all strong, good fighters and whatnot. And if that doesn't strike you as weird, I don't know what does. And it's that thing that I found so problematic with also, and this once again comes back to that whole idea of like authenticity. Once you then write historical novels or something like Gwyn does with his book, where you pay a lot of attention to the authenticity, you automatically not only claim, like it kind of comes with the territory. It's like you don't only claim authenticity when it comes to, or as close as possible as authenticity could be these days, right? When it comes to weapons and clothing. No, you also automatically kind of at least imply that your depiction of their morals, of their culture, all that other stuff is also authentic, which it is not, because we don't know how those things were. So if you then picture those people as honest, honorable, and so forth, you perpetuate that mythology, that myth of the good Scandinavian, the good Viking in a way, and that I feel is the dangerous bit there, because basically what you do is you play the same thing, and that is of course not always done with like any like bad intention. It's not like you want to sneak in some fascist or racist ideology just by having cool Vikings in your story or in your songs or on your heavy metal cover or whatnot. No, but it makes it so much easier for those bad actors that are out there to just play the same game. And this is where I have the problem, right? This is where I have the issue with a lot of this like Viking depiction. You may have all these, I don't know, pagan metal bands, you have all these like cheaper Viking fictions and stuff out there, and they're all cool and everyone's like that, and then you suddenly find out that some of those people also believe in like the actual natural superiority of Vikings, which, bullshit. And that is sort of my issue there, that if we don't go about these things critically and are aware of where a lot of that comes from, we kind of make it super easy for bad actors. And I just assume that most people watching this are not fascist and racist. I sincerely hope so. But who knows? So, but we make it so much easier for these bad actors to do their thing. And one of those things that we should be aware of is that when it comes to a lot of like these like retellings of Norse mythology, of mythology in general, a lot of that was done in like the 19th century, where a lot of countries in Europe started to collect themselves and organize themselves as nation states. The Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, as someone famously said, kind of fell apart, and there's the birth of like national Germany, and you have similar things happening in Italy, and you have obviously the idea of a national identity coming up in Finland, which is trying to be something else than just a piece of land that Russians and Swedes fight over, or alternately occupy. And that's where people start collecting national like myths and so forth to create a national identity. It's your brothers Grimm who have they were part of the 1848 and before uprising, not uprising, but what Germans call a revolution, which is totally not a revolution because Germans don't know how to revolt. But it was part of that, and there is a lot of nationalism involved there, obviously, because it's what you need to foment to create that movement to actually have a nation state. And I've said it before, the idea of a nation state in general is dumb and should be left behind as soon as possible. But obviously that's not what's going to happen. So it's important to be aware that stuff like, you know, your Richard Wagner dragging up those old Nibelungenlied stuff to create his Ring cycle, or the Brothers Grimm starting to collect German fairy tales, which are actually mostly collected regionally here in Hessen and Hesse, and then, you know, even then most of those are also come from all kinds of places, because obviously they talk to people that had moved to Germany from all kinds of other places as well. But, you know, that is then labeled as German because people try to figure out what makes something German. You have the same thing in Finland with Lönnrot going about to all these places in Karelia, only in Karelia mostly, and create something that is then later on seen as the Finnish national mythology. And that's sort of where I see the big problem there, is those things were created with a specific intention, and one that we may just not want to, you know, buy into completely. At least I hope so, because, yeah, once again, I don't, you know, fully agree with that. Not only not fully, I just think that it's bad. And it's these things, these ideas of how medieval times or Viking times and Norse times looked like, that are perpetuated up until today. And this is where I feel we should be more critical. And once again, it's like you go to your metal festival, you listen to your Amon Amarth or whatever, and they are perpetuating basically a comic style Viking idea, and people are uncritically taking those over and then think that that's really how it was. No, not all Vikings were huge, blonde, bearded dudes that, I don't know, drank out of horns. Like, actually, you know, horns, like those drinking horns, were usually used, as far as I know, for more like ceremonial usage. And usually you use your, I don't know, clay cup like every other peasant as well, because mostly that's what you are. So there's that. And all right, this is basically empty. I'm gonna move this over, and I'm gonna take my other, well, I'm gonna clean up this mess later on. This is what the other thing is, like what I said before. Making mead is very much a sticky thing, and you should be aware of that. Like, don't do it indoors unless you're really, really, you know, careful with things, which I'm obviously not. But, you know. All right, to come back to this whole idea. Just gonna use this out here, and then use this wonderful wooden spoon to do more stuff, like severely mix this up. As I said before, I'm using warm water to make sure it mixes well. Yeah, those things were like created with an agenda and are as far away from the actual truth as can be, because obviously archaeology and history were not the kind of science they are today. They didn't always even exist. And the same goes for folklore studies in the 19th century. A lot of that stuff is made up and then just uncritically taken over into the 20th century. And then you have people who try to even incorporate stuff like Christianity in Germany with like Viking stuff, and suddenly Balder is identified, the Norse god Balder is identified with Christ, which is dumb. Or other people think that Christ was German, and that's something, you know, those are like things that start in the late 19th century and go all the way through the 1920s and early 1930s, when they are finally mixed up with all the stuff the Nazis do. And they use, you know, runes and stuff like that, and well, after a while we just take it over, like, I don't know, do our comic books of Thor and Loki and mix those things. It's fine to take it, like, these stories and use them and to create new stories, because some of those are very, you know, dear to human nature in general, so that kind of makes sense. But if you uncritically take over all that baggage that came with the stories we now know, and ignore the fact that they were created with intentions that were more than just let's tell a story, then you come to a difficult point there, because you make it so much easier for people to misuse those stories. So I'm getting thirsty, so I'm going to take a drink here. All right, quick aside before we're going to do something new now, because we're going to add juice. Why do you need to add juice? You don't need to add juice, fruit juice, to your mead. I use it to raise the level of acidity, if I can. It's just not as easy as it looks because my hands are sticky and sweaty and whatnot. But I'm going to use... fucking hell. Here we go. I'm gonna use pomegranate juice for whatever reason. Like, okay, so you need to add, or you can add juice to raise the level of acidity of your mead, and that makes fermentation faster or easier. It doesn't have that much of an impact on the flavor, in my experience, but as I said, it helps with that. And I'm usually putting in like 1 liter to 1.5 liters of fruit juice to add, as I said, not flavor, but raise the level of acidity. And I chose pomegranate juice for 2 reasons. One, since this is not authentic mead, there's no need to just use something that sounds authentically Viking. Once again, authenticity is a lie in this case anyway. The other thing is, pomegranates are pomegranates. And there is a quiz I'm going to link down below, and you do that quiz and you're going to understand why pomegranates are so important to all of this. All right, that's sort of that. I added, as I said, like these 2 liters, nice 1.5 liters of pomegranate juice. I'm going to mix it again, and then we can add yeast and put a fermentation lock on the whole thing. And then we're done. All right, so to reiterate what I've been saying all the time, because, you know, is that when we play around with Vikings because they're cool, or we think they're cool because, you know, guys with swords in ships with dragon heads, which, yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah. We should be aware that that's a construction. That is a construction that was largely made up by people who had very bad intentions. And when we are uncritically taking those things over and claiming authenticity, like what happens when you go into a lot of details that are sort of accurate when it comes to how the state of science of archaeology and history is these days. When we do that, we open the door wide for those people who want once again to use stuff like Viking imagery for bad purposes. And that's why I feel we need to be careful with this. And once again, I've said it before, there's a lot of people that masquerade as just historians and do their historical reenactment or whatever, and insist on putting stuff like a sun wheel or something that looks very much like a swastika on their shield because it's historically accurate. Yeah, it may be, but seriously, you could choose a different device. There's more than swastikas or other ones of those problematic things. You could do that. Also, if you're looking into archaeology, want to do something historically accurate, the design on your fucking shield is the last thing that is necessary to make something historically accurate. It's about the wood, it's about the metal, it's about all these other things. The actual the actual paint you're using to paint that design on your shield is more important than the device you're actually putting on there. If you insist on putting a symbol on there that has been used by Nazis, chances are you just want to do that because Nazis are something that you also think is cool, and that is wrong. There's no way in hell using a swastika or some of those other symbols co-opted by the Nazis on in your Viking thing just because of authenticity. Even less when you're going to a fantasy world like John Gwynne does, but obviously I'm not blaming him here because he's not doing that. I'm just saying that his attention to authentic detail can be dangerous because it opens the gate for those people who use the argument of authenticity to then perpetuate an ideology. Once again, John Gwynne is not doing that. I'm just saying it's that type of like attention to specific things that are then the attention to authenticity or the things that we can actually claim as being authentic. It's that then, you know, gets used to push an agenda that is generally always wrong. Right, I'm going to have another drink and then I'm going to look for the yeast, because that's sort of when we end this all. All right. All right, here we go. I found yeast and something else. So you need yeast to make mead, right? To make alcohol, to let that whole thing ferment, you need yeast. I took, in this case, it's yeast used for making wine. Specifically, yeast made for making port wine. The reason is that port wine is rather sweet, as you probably know. And sweet wine has, like port wine yeast, has the potential to reach a higher level of alcohol and can deal with like much sweeter, like how to say, with the like added amount of sugar that you have in this stuff here. So that's why I use port wine yeast, but you could potentially use any other kind of yeast. All right, so we did that. Now we're gonna do something that I've never done before. I'm super interested to figure out how to see if it works out. And this is to use something called, it's a kind of salt that you can use to make the yeast grow faster. So I'm going to use some of that as well. To make the yeast grow faster and thus hopefully get a higher fermentation rate. I'm going to put that in, and there, we're basically done. I'm going to, you know, mix it all up again. The important thing is to make sure that the water is cold enough to be below 35 degrees of temperature, because otherwise it will kill your yeast. It also needs to be warmer than 15 degrees mostly. All right, we are basically done. I'm gonna put this on here, which is a fermentation lock. You screw it on here. I can show you the detail, like the fermentation lock itself is this bit here. It consists of like two pieces, there's water in between, so once fermentation starts, a lot of carbohydrate is created and all this, like the pressure rises, so your bottles will burst if you don't have something like this. But you also don't want it open to the air, so, you know, everything could go in there and maybe kill the yeast or make the fermentation go bad. So you have this thing, there's water in there that, basically if like bubbles come up, they go into the water, and then this here will go up and, and leave the bubble, let the bubbles go out. I need to adjust the water level here a bit, but I'll do that in a minute. Anyway. This is how you make mead in a very unprofessional way. If you go and look at like all these other, like there's channels out on YouTube and there's people writing about it that explain a lot more details on how to make it properly. You need to do that if you want to sell that stuff. If you want to drink it yourself, you can be much more basic there, because the other thing that we need to know there and understand here is people made these things under worse hygienic conditions, right? Much worse than these. So this stuff can take a lot more than you might think. But once again, if you want to do this professionally, go ahead and learn from someone else. My point here with this was to show that something that is always, mixed with like pop cultural reception of Vikings these days is drinking mead out of horns. But you can make that in the most unprofessional and modern way possible, and it will still be the same mead in the end. This will take a couple of weeks to ferment, and I'll certainly make a mead tasting once it is done and actually tell you how bad it has become. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something from it. Let me know in the comments. Want to argue Mead with me? Go ahead. Want to argue Vikings with me? Go ahead and do so. Otherwise, like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you really soon once again about Nationalism. Until then, skål.